Everyone with a social media account is familiar with the term canceled, unless you've been living under the rock, of course. It seems like every time I log into Twitter, under the trending section, I see a new company or celebrity that's being canceled for some outrageous thing they said or done, whether it's justified or not. On this week's episode of the Infusion Breakdown Show, the season finale might I add, we sat down with two very special guests, author and musician Jacob Forensic, and podcaster slash author Marco Perry from the Perry Platform podcast to talk all about cancel culture. Let's see what we come up with. Before we get started on today's episode, I'd like to introduce to you our Black-owned Business of the Week, where we showcase quality Black-owned businesses for you to support every week. This week's business is Kosher Av clothing brand by Lionel Victor. Kosher Av is more than your average independent clothing brand. They not only create new fashion, but promote positivity and regularly host flea markets and service showcases for seamstresses, artists, and musicians all throughout the 804 and 757. If you're interested in their fall line, be sure to follow them on IG and visit their website for updates.
Okay, today's question is going to be, has cancel culture gone too far? Comment below, let us know. Today's guests will also include Jacob and Marco Perry from the Perry Platform podcast.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on, guys. This question is very interesting. I've talked a lot about cancel culture, and the first thing that came to my mind when I was analyzing the inquiry was, is it possible to make a case that cancel culture has not gone too far? I try to think about that, and it seemed to me that there wasn't anything I could put forward to defend that, because no matter where you are on the political spectrum, you're going to have some issues with some form of cancel culture, whether it's someone on the right who's trying to cancel something that's more liberal, or someone on the left trying to cancel something that's more conservative. So from here, I tried to take a closer look at what exactly cancel culture is. Fundamentally, it struck me as just a tool, something that people can use to stop something that is distasteful. Because individually, you can only get so far. But if you band together as a group and you express your disapproval for something, there's a greater chance you can have an impact there. But like with many tools here, there are different uses. Like a hammer, you can build something, but you can also hit someone on the head with it. Then it becomes questionable if the tool is being used appropriately. So I further tried to examine cases of cancel culture that one person could look at and say, this makes sense to me. Like a company that's using child labor or something like that. Something that no matter where you are, you can find deplorable, no matter where you land on the spectrum of politics. And there are cases that are more questionable, like trying to cancel a company because they have an executive who is a Republican or someone who has openly said they voted for Trump. Here, there's a lot of debate. So it seems to me the real issue with cancel culture isn't the fact that it's a tool that's available. It's more so we don't collectively understand how to apply it. There's a gap in conversation that stopped us from, weeding out the appropriate scenarios to use the tool to get corporations or big groups to bend to the will of the public. And we just don't have that definition. It's not laid out. People are using it to fit political agendas, using it to destroy people, using it to further their own interest, and it's really just chaos right now. And that's kind of where I am with the whole cancel culture topic.
Nice. There was a particular interesting bit that you did when you were conversing with Jacob on the episode that you guys did, I think it was 3 weeks ago, to where you said that it's kind of attributed to the fact that people believe that the human mind is sponge-like. And so that just by the mere exposure to certain ideas or things, then it automatically gets absorbed. And they fail to realize that people also have their own perspective. So it's kind of like, instead of the mind being a sponge, it's more so a filter. We have our predispositions that inhibit us from taking information certain ways. And so it's not exactly like if you read a book, you're going to take in all the ideas. It's actually a well-known fact that people typically only read books that fit their perspectives anyway.
Yeah, 100%. Like we see this phenomenon very much in academia, where you'll have certain people coming onto a campus to give a talk, popular figures like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson. People will try to cancel that in exactly the way you described because they fear the ideas are so dangerous, they can't be allowed to be heard. They can't be allowed to be said. So protesters will show up and they'll try to shut down the event. And it's a massive problem because you have as many people there who do want to hear it. And now you have a fight because the definition of cancel culture isn't mutually agreed upon. So as you mentioned, I try to think about why exactly people are doing that. Why are they so adamant about stopping ideas? And it seemed to me that it's because they are regarding the mind as a sponge to some extent. The fact that Ben Shapiro is here saying something that could be considered dangerous, to them might mean that the entire audience will take that idea, internalize it, go out and further spread it like a pathogen, and there'll be no way to curb that. So they're trying to stop it before it even gets that far. But ironically, what they've actually done is make the idea more popular, because now the media is covering it, people are freaking out, causing a commotion, and everyone knows about Ben Shapiro getting canceled on campus now. If you didn't hear about him before, now you probably do, and you can look him up and figure things out. And aside from that, it's not even the best way to combat bad ideas. If you really think something is a terrible notion, it seems to me debate and conversation is the way to go. The mind really isn't a sponge. It's trying to find reasons to believe things, and you have to supply that. If all you're saying is you can't hear these ideas because they're dangerous, it comes off as condescending and almost like you're trying to parent the individual.
I don't disagree at all. Jacob, did you have any additional thoughts on that? What was your perspective on cancel culture?
Yes, I think Perry and me have overlap here, as we were talking about on his podcast, but I think specifically what Perry is talking about is this kind of cultural aspect to it, whereas also cancel culture, because it is such a broad category and no one really has a definition, as Marco mentioned, you have to also talk about the temperamental, the personal attack on people, things like this. And we see this all the time. And this is something that from Obama to anyone really on the political spectrum, people have been discussing it. So it's not just the right wing or the neoconservative that are focusing on these issues. You have if someone makes a mistake in their 20s, and like serious mistakes, saying something homophobic or, being deplorable or acting racist in their teens, etc. Any number of ways that we wouldn't want people to behave, and then being in positions of power or influence later on in life in their 30s, 40s, 50s, you find that people are unforgiving. And this is the thing I think people need to understand, is that understandably so, because positions of influence are really important for people, at least in a allegorical way, kind of. They're supposed to represent something, like being the president of the United States. You have, this is like an esteemed, prestigious position that, there's something more about that position than just the job. There's something about, the leadership, the integrity, the honesty that position is supposed to hold. And so, you will hold people to account for their mistakes. But the problem with that is that you have a number of kind of premises that are just unsubstantiated. The sponge premise. You have the fact that obviously everyone's going to make mistakes, and before your prefrontal cortex is fully developed, I mean, are we really responsible for the views we've held when I was 18, 19? I mean, and even more so, we're going to change even rapidly. So there's almost like this, there's a number of premises that are just based on, it seems, incorrect dogma of, not being able to make mistakes. And I just don't know how these people exist. I'm friends with a number of them. People have very extreme views on cancel culture. Like in person, I know them. I mean, they make mistakes, and there's like this double standard hypocrisy with it that is concerning, but worth discussing.
Absolutely. I mean, just to step back for a second to the sponge comment that you guys had reviewed, it's almost as if we're looking to bypass the element of being a smart consumer, like taking that opportunity away from people. So it's no longer the matter of whether information is presented to you. You take it in, assess it. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it informative? Or is it garbage? And discarding it and moving forward accordingly. As far as my general views on cancel culture, I think that there is no shortage of reprehensible behavior, just as you said, Jacob. Like, there are things that definitely should be addressed and are bad for us as a society. But we can't bypass the process of actually going through and gathering information and making well-informed decisions. Like, once we skip that, we set a terrible precedent. And I really think it's important to choose our battles too, because some things, like you said, they're unsubstantiated, or for like one example was J.K. Rowling, who seems to get canceled every other week. I find that a little bit funny. Like, I see that hashtag on Twitter, And so I think there was one instance where she had made, or she defined a woman as, or people who menstruate. And I think if people are looking at that for validation, I think that's also an issue. Like someone who's like just an author and they're just stating their personal opinion on something, whether it's whether you agree or disagree, and you find that problematic enough to actually call for someone's cancellation, or because I mean that does translate to real world consequences. And like what you were saying about the positions of power, it's a little bit different from a like a children's author and then a head of state, for example. I think there's definite differences. My main problems with cancel culture are there's 4 dangers I've identified. So the simplification of the individual, you see one cross section, one occurrence of what happens, and we discard the rest. I mean, and it's understandable for the fact that we don't have information based off anyone else's given history at that moment. Because, like, for example, maybe you might not be someone who might not be familiar with Joe Rogan. They just see a little bit and think, oh, he's a bigot or he hates it. Okay, but if you actually know him in his totality, which none of us really do, only he does. But if you have watched previous episodes of his podcast or just seen how he conducts himself and the things that he said, you know, that you may be find yourself to be wrong. And that's just the case of what media is in general. Like, we have a small cross section and it kind of warps and shapes our opinions accordingly. The second thing I've identified is the dissolution of forgiveness and redemption. So it's like there's no real plan or course of action for redemption at all. Like with Kevin Hart when he was hosting the Oscars, or called to host the Oscars, and he had some jokes he had made about if his son was gay and he would smash the dollhouse over his head, which was completely absurd, but he's a comedian. So I get that. I highly doubt he was even he wasn't being factual. But so he'd apologized beforehand, before these comments resurfaced, before the Oscars. And then once they came up again, he apologized again. His resignation or stepping down from the position of hosting was called for once more. And then he apologized again. But then after that point, he said, you know what, I'm done. I'm not apologizing anymore, because at that point, he's just feeding into a cycle of negativity and it becomes another talking point. But there was nothing in some individuals' minds that he could have done to make amends for that. Like, he addressed it, apologized for it, and he's someone who, like, I'm not a huge fan of Kevin Hart's work, which is like non-consequential to the matter. But from what I've seen, he's a fairly positive guy, and he's always trying to better himself. And he's like, when he was on Joe Rogan's podcast explaining this, he's someone who prides himself in being inclusive to everyone, and like, you can go to a Kevin Hart show and have a good time. So he's not about spreading hatred, and that's what I see just based on the outside perspective. I don't know him in his totality. Only he does, like I was saying earlier. But I think that's a prime example of there's no real, like, okay, do this and then we're gonna forgive you. It's almost like you're stricken with a scarlet letter of sorts. Like, it's there with you for life. The third thing I actually noticed was the elimination of healthy discourse. So with the Joe Rogan example, a lot of times I would see him getting canceled because he has people from the right on his podcast to have conversation, healthy discourse. But he himself identifies as pretty liberal, which I've seen before, and he's touted it several times. And I don't see anything out.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you say Joe Rogan gets canceled, what do you mean?
Okay, so
because
not
Joe Rogan's doing fine.
Yeah, not in the sense of his podcast ending.
Yeah,
I
know that.
Okay, but people being outraged to the point where, or a selective group, should I say, they're outraged to the point to where they think that it's that they're justified in calling for the cancellation, or they're being outraged. Okay. So people are legitimately upset because he has people on his podcast from opposing viewpoints, when the idea is to have that dialogue to understand. I think that's something that he prides himself on. Like, his position on his podcast, he takes it as a learning opportunity. So he's very inquisitive. I'm not certain if you watch his podcast often. I know you've seen him before.
Yeah, I've seen clips of it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't strike me as somebody who's trying to push any kind of agenda. It's like he has a variety of guests who introduce, like, a lot of people who I haven't been familiar with. For example, like Bret Weinstein, super brilliant guy. I was introduced to him on there, and then like all of his ones with Jordan Peterson, CT Fletcher, the bodybuilder. Who else? I just love all, like,
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, the one with Bernie Sanders. the one with Elon Musk started off really slow. I think that was
it was a bad episode, honestly.
as bad as the Neil deGrasse Tyson one, the most recent one, I believe, where he kept interrupting Joe.
Oh, I haven't seen that one. But that's classic Neil.
It's painful. It's so painful. But to get back to the point I was saying about the healthy discourse is, I don't think there's anything wrong with having conversations with people who have opposing viewpoints, and I think it's in that we're able to make better informed decisions. And I think during the course of your discussion on the podcast that Marco and you did, Jacob, it was brought up the idea of explaining back the other person's ideas better than they can, and then addressing that or dismantling that, not in a malicious manner, but it's the opposite of a straw man argument. I think the term you coined it as was the steel man argument. I rather like that. The fourth thing that I identified was the persecution of the paranoid. So when you actually take action against somebody who feels like you have some kind of vendetta, or that people are out to get them, you end up unconsciously or inadvertently proving that. So now they have some kind of claim to substantiate that and say that, okay, yeah, this is really true. And so kind of what you were saying earlier with people who are unaware of Ben Shapiro when they come into speech at the campus. And then so by them shutting that down, now people know about him, and it's like, okay, yeah, they really don't want me to be speaking. This is really a dangerous idea. Why is this guy so dangerous? So you're actually doing marketing for him. It's kind of like the saying where people say no publicity is bad publicity, in that sense, which I don't totally agree with. But as far as solutions go, I think that we have to properly debate the ideas. We can't run away from things just because we don't agree with them. And when it comes to having discussions about these ideas, I think that we should also be moving towards the truth, not focusing on the individual, but by focusing on the truth, we're able to stay away from the ulterior motive, which I think a lot of people do when it comes to addressing certain things when people speak out, is to punish the individual, which I think that takes away from the core matter. So it's like, what's more beneficial for long-term success? Are you more concerned with punishing someone, or are you more concerned with continued well-being? And so I think that's something to keep in the back of our minds as well as we move forward and deal with these incidents.
Yeah, I just want to say, Brian, I agree with you 100%. That was very well said, and I'm glad you actually laid out the pillars. You know, it's easy to keep that in mind. If people could understand that, I think we'd actually find a way to handle cancel culture. These are the issues with it. If we can find a way to work with that and figure things out, there's a productive end game here that we can all reach. And I know Desmond hasn't spoke yet, so I want to give him a chance now.
Did you want to go, Des?
Yeah, I appreciate you for passing the mic. First and foremost, when it comes to cancel culture, I'm pretty much distanced from social media. I don't really have a Twitter. Instagram, you can pretty much filter what it is you want to see because they have it to where they kind of fill your explore page with things you frequently view. So just listening to you guys talk, I think the one main question, because I have a background in political science, and then I was also pre-law as well. My main question is, do you guys think that cancel culture has a respect of free speech, or is there an infringement of free speech? And then if it does clash, how much does it shape the legitimacy of cancel culture?
Well, that's a really good question, actually. Well, because I think the cancel culture is directly linked to the problem of free speech. Like and this is, I think, most prescient because you have the emergence of right-wing populist groups, extremist groups in Europe since the 80s, 90s, and now it's quite urgent here. And you have, Boris Johnson in England, Viktor Orban in Hungary, etc. You've got Greece, Finland, Poland, and you have prescient problems they have to face. And a lot of what people will say is it's because of that we have allowed these positions of neo-Nazi hate speech or anti-immigrant hate speech, and these type of, we haven't been effective gatekeepers. But in entirety, it seems to be an empirical question, and a researcher whose name I forget. I think it was Robert Putnam. He said that right-wing populism / anti-immigrant speech that is directly linked to right-wing populism. To him, the connection was virtually identical to Kaufman. He was quoting Putnam, and he said that since the 1960s, right-wing populism is connected to weakening face-to-face interactions. And so you look at free speech and these questions of cancel culture, and that is, to me, one of the only justifications for canceling speech is if it would be linked to extremism. If promoting ideas such as anti-immigration, which I'm particularly against anti-immigrant speech because I myself am an immigrant from Slovakia to Canada, and vice versa basically now, because I love Slovakia and I'm basically Canadian. I'm half, and I lived in England, so I felt the immigrant mindset very much, and so I would feel how people would interact with you as an immigrant. When you say in England that you're Slovakian versus Canadian, it was just a very different emotion. Slovakian, they wouldn't like you. And Canadian, they'd be like, oh, you're from Canada, that's awesome. Because you're from Eastern Europe versus you're from a Western developed nation. And so for me, I'm totally sympathetic to the concerns people have about, allowing certain speech on campuses. But then another thing is, as was mentioned earlier, that a lot of people assume that these people like Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, because of certain things, that they will then get misrepresented or boxed in. I think categories in and of themselves, they seem to not work, and people are just really complicated. And for myself, what I've noticed is people who say things, language is limited. When you dive deep and when you have one-on-one interactions, conversations, as Putnam was saying, that thing that we've had weakening, then you notice that the people are nuanced and people have views that are not just extreme. There's something there. There's something that happened, that they have this view. And let's talk about it. Let's see why you're against Slovakians and not against Canadians, and see the fallacy there or something. And so I think those are a couple of those issues that I would say in connection to free speech, and why I understand. And that's something I think people who talk about these issues, they need to, I think, understand, as was mentioned, Donald Davidson said, understand the opposing opinion and argument and represent it in its best possible way, and then comment on your view and how you would amend it with the other one.
I think the main reason why I asked that particular question, though, is because, for example, Brian said that like J.K. Rowling, she gets canceled every other week, and she said something in regards to identifying women by, by menstruation or something along those lines. And I kind of think like throughout high school, throughout middle school, and even throughout college, like we always looked at free speech as people pretty much have the ultimate right to say whatever they want, as long as it doesn't hurt that person, whether it be libel or whether it be slanderous in any specific way. So when I kind of think of something like that, like even with the Kevin Hart thing, I get it's dangerous because of the platform it has, or the platform that these two people have, whether it be, J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter or Kevin Hart with his comedic, his platform itself. But does that not just, like, in my mind, does it not just with the fundamental understanding of free speech, does that not infringe upon his ability to speak his mind, though, at the same time?
Yeah, I think it does. Fundamentally, cancel culture goes against free speech right now, but I don't think it has to be the case. The way I view cancel culture, I don't see it as necessarily evil or good. To me, it's just a tool, like I would view a knife. It depends on how you use it. We just don't have the definition to properly apply it. I'm a big fan of free speech, and I'm against actually canceling people like J.K. Rowling. I'd rather much hear her out and then formulate a response to her comments. If we can just figure out a way to perhaps base cancel culture around things that are more concrete, Like if a company, I think I mentioned before, is actually doing something heinous, there's proof that they're using child labor or they're mistreating their employees or something like that. I don't really have a problem with going out and canceling the company in whatever way we can. Like, I think we can all agree there are cases where canceling something is actually appropriate, and there are cases where it's not. And I would put free speech in that bucket of it's not appropriate. It's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah, that was the only thing that I was really at a discrepancy with. I think the other thing that I'm at a partial discrepancy is I don't think there's a medium either when it comes to cancel culture. Because just a little bit of reading I've done, I was able to find a New York Times article that was written, I think, around 2019 in regards to cancel culture. And I'm sorry, actually, this is this year. And it brings up a really good point that cancel culture, more or less, because there's no happy medium, it favors more of a liberal point of view rather than a conservative point of view, to where you will see more frequently your liberal base or your liberal population finding more things to cancel than your conservative population. But at the same time, when you think of liberals, theoretically, they should be doing the least amount of canceling because of just the liberal nature in itself.
It's contradictory, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting, though. I wouldn't say cancel culture is inherently just working on the side of the liberals. It's more so working on behalf of whatever is mainstream. If you were in a country where the mainstream views were more conservative, you can even take some of the authoritarian regimes like Hitler's Germany and whatever. They deployed cancel culture in some form or another. It's really what is popular, what's really commonly held as a belief that people can hop onto. That's what cancel culture is kind of working off in today's environment, I think.
Yeah, that was
exactly
a good example.
Yeah, because you would see it with Victorian England, right, against same-sex relations. You would see it in Pakistan today against atheism, and even in the past, throughout millennia, against atheists. And, in medieval Christendom, you would have it against Jews and Muslims. And now in Russia, you have it against, liberals and feminists. So, there's, I agree, there's a lot of different strands of canceling. And so we're dealing with probably the best version of it, which is, extreme politeness, basically, it's the best alternative.
Yeah, and just one more thing I want to put out here is canceling itself. We use this term. It's almost like a euphemism or a bucket of sorts that we just throw in to describe the phenomenon. But canceling someone can be like you've mentioned in Saudi Arabia or something, where you're being beheaded because you're espousing atheist views, or it can be like in North America where maybe you're losing your job. Canceling, the term itself is so loaded. There's so many different ways it can manifest in the real world.
One thing that Jacob had brought up, I believe, when he was just speaking, was the phenomenon of groupthink versus individual think, and it's something that I've noticed myself. And then also when I was listening to Bret Weinstein on the psychology podcast, or I forget what the exact title is, but he was on another podcast speaking about his experience at Evergreen. So he was speaking with students who were perfectly rational, and he was able to have productive conversations with them on a one-on-one basis. But as soon as it came down to large groups, those same individuals would abandon those previous conversations and switch to more of a group way of thinking. And I'm curious, what do you think is what's responsible for that? Do you think that cancel culture, I think it's something that's further enhanced when it comes to Twitter? That's where I specifically see it most of all. Do you think that's something that Twitter and I guess the way we consume our media contributes towards by having people work as a collective, or do you think that it's brought or born forth from some other source?
Yeah, well, I think that at least the research that I've looked at, which is brief, but I've noted the entire phenomenon of echo chambers and algorithm, just the way it works on Twitter, the retweeting function on Facebook, the resharing. It's a platform. All of these platforms are designed in a way to garner attention, keep attention, and to create avenues of communication between like-minded people so that they still are there, or to create purposeful strife, to create engagement, as on Twitter. I mean, you see that all the time. So I think that, and people have been saying this, researchers like Johnathan Haidt, who does a cognitive psychologist, who does research on this. He wrote an article on this in the Atlantic with a number of other researchers, and you see it, all over the place. People are talking about this problem that Facebook is not helping democracy at all. You have the advertising, but then you also have this, the conversing that is vitriolic on Twitter. I mean, 140 or whatever characters it is. This is not. It's not a design. It's not a place designed for discourse. It's a place designed for gaining attention in the most effective way possible. And you don't have attention in essays and papers. No one has the attention span to read Perry's 15-page response on cancel culture. But if Perry writes 140 characters on saying that cancel culture is a myth, whatever, cancel culture is bad, and just saying that, and then you have outrage, and then you have, how could you say that? You didn't define your base, you didn't elaborate. How can you say this? And then you have attention. I think the algorithm is fundamentally not about anything that people one-on-one get what Bret Weinstein was talking about.
Also, speaking of Twitter, I kind of want to toss something out just to get your guys' opinion on it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had like a very controversial tweet about cancel culture. She was kind of downplaying it, and I'll just read it out here so we have it. So she says the term cancel culture comes from entitlement, as though the person complaining has the right to a large captive audience, and one is a victim and people choose to tune them out. Odds are you're not actually canceled, you're just being challenged, held accountable, or unliked. What do you guys think about that statement?
Josh, do you want to take that first?
Well, she's not defining anything. That's the problem. Yeah, go for it.
What?
No, go for it.
First, I was going to go into as far as what I really think about cancel culture, and if I feel it actually has gone too far. Before I actually answer your question, Marco, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
As far as cancel culture, I'll say yes and no, because I think our generation gets a lot of criticism because we do that. But at the same time, you have to give them credit for actually having the courage to actually stand up and actually say certain things are wrong, like the Confederate flag and old statues that actually fought for slavery. But at the same time, the problem with cancel culture is people quickly cancel people altogether rather than just bringing it to people's attention for explanation, I feel, because a lot of behavior is learned, whether it's from people's parents or whether it's from their experiences throughout actual society. And at the same time, I feel the people that are actually being canceled make the same mistake. Not everybody, but some people, because a lot of those people simply apologize and or step down from their position rather than give an actual explanation as to why they did such a thing or what made them think that way in the first place. So I do think in some way they feed into cancel culture with that reaction and because of those comments, really, I feel. But you mentioned Kevin Hart. I feel the one thing he did do wrong was apologize so many times. Like after the first time, you don't have to apologize so many times. Like after the first time, apologize and that's it. The reason why he stepped down is I looked that up too earlier. Is because they wanted him to apologize again. He was like, I already apologized. Like, there's no reason for me to even do that. He was like, after that, I was like, okay, cool. I'm no longer going to be the host because they wanted him to apologize again. He was like, no, I'm not going to apologize again. I already did that. So I think a lot of that is the reaction that people give to people. And because really, if people don't give that reaction, I don't think cancel culture really would live. If you mentioned J.K. Rowling too. I don't know much about people canceling J.K. Rowling, but she's fine with the books. I mean, she's doing really fine. It might be a select group of people, but I feel it's not really affecting her livelihood. I wouldn't feel that's really canceling J.K. Rowling because people aren't stopping go see Harry Potter. Like, oh, I'm not going to see Harry Potter because she said that about women now. You know what I mean? So yeah, so it's but a lot of it I feel is definitely how people react to it. And I know Desmond mentioned conservatives being less likely to call out cancel culture, or less likely to do something like cancel culture related, you got to think of it because, like, why is Donald Trump president? Other than the fact that he got the most electoral votes. I mean, he's been tried to be canceled at least 1,000 times over. There's many allegations that went across him. He just doesn't, like, he just left it alone. He doesn't even address it. That's on a different spectrum. He does. I want you to at least explain it, but he has no morals, so he's not going to actually explain why he did such. But he's president, and he got accused of being peed on, he got sex with a porn star, he got so many allegations. So a lot of that is, I feel, the actual reaction that people give to the cancel culture, or people saying, oh, now you cancel now. Like, okay, cool, I'm gonna keep doing this over here, you know?
I think you hit that on the head when it comes to like the conditioning, when people set the precedent of, okay, because I've been called out about this, I need to immediately step down and issue all these apologies, as opposed to walking through the necessary steps, like what you were saying, explaining the case. Maybe it was something that was misinterpreted, or maybe it was something that was a genuine learning experience. They were ignorant in their previous comments or actions, and then they thought about it through some time and were able to come to something different.
Yeah, and like even with Kevin Hart, like I saw that he posted a tweet of him actually apologizing. This is like, I'm sorry guys, I'm keep growing. Like, I mean, you could say like, hey, growing up, I mean, even if he actually felt that way, that could have actually just been a haha joke, because people do that. But if he actually felt the way, I mean, that's how black people are growing up. We like black people are really homophobic, because that's just how, like, that's how a lot of black people are, and that's really the truth. Growing up, it's changing now, but that's how a lot of like older black people. My dad is like that. I can say that my dad is like that to some degree, and my mom was like that to the fact that she had to like change. Like, okay, it's not that serious. So
I think that's something interesting you bring about like older black people and their mindset. I think that's not something that's unique to that specific group of our culture.
yes.
I would say that's something that's more closely identified with the conservative mindset. And you think about older black people, like our grandparents, our parents, they typically have more conservative mindsets.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry. Now, I'm sorry. What?
I was going to ask, what were your thoughts on the tweet that Marco had to share?
I was going to ask Marco to retweet. I'm sorry.
No problem. So AOC goes on Twitter and she says, the term cancel culture comes from entitlement, as though the person complaining has the right to a large captive audience and one is a victim if people choose to tune them out. Odds are you're not actually canceled, you're just being challenged, held accountable, or unliked.
I say that's pretty accurate. So who said that?
AOC.
Who's that exactly? I'm not familiar.
She's from the House of Representatives.
Oh, okay.
She's pretty outspoken. I think she's the Hispanic representative.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to confuse Latina and Hispanic. I'm not sure the exact terminology, but she's been in the news quite frequently.
Yeah, she said they're entitled to a large audience. Yeah, I say that's pretty accurate. Would anybody else want to go on that?
I want to hear Jacob's thoughts, because he has a whole article, and this is part of it too.
Yeah, well, I think what she's doing is, I mean, yeah, she's definitely also right. But what she's doing is she's talking about a subgroup of what is cancel culture related to. And that subgroup is successful authors like J.K. Rowling and Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, people who have like New York Times best-selling books. She's not talking about people like, you know, my friend who's doing a PhD in chemistry at Imperial College of London and who's a conservative, and when he expresses conservative views on whatever, you know, he's also happens to be Christian. So he has some outdated, probably, to me at least, and to many, views on any number of social issues. You know, he's met with statements such as, oh, you're bigoted, oh, you know, you can't make this joke about these people, and etc. And he was called up by HR, Human Resources, you know, by saying these things. And he was really in a position of being like scared for his job, his, you know, education, his PhD. So that's the thing. AOC is talking about some people for sure, Sam Harris. And in that case, yeah, don't complain. You're millionaires and you have successful careers, and losing 50% of your audience, it's bad, but you know yourself that you're not going to lose any bread. And you should value your speech and the words you make, and you should suffer if you say something dumb. Maybe suffering for something you said 20 years ago is pretty dumb. If you did, I don't know, anything like Jimmy Kimmel, whatever, if they said something like Kevin Hart, homophobic in his early 20s, I mean, who hasn't? Especially in that age, right? Like back in the day, in the early 2000s, everyone was homophobic. It was a horrible time, but we would find a lot of bad tweets and bad stuff from a lot of people, and we'd be canceling everyone. And so it's kind of like, for me, I look at that. I look at like people, and people are flawed, people change. But AOC is talking about, she's right. She's talking about some people, and that's granted, but she's not talking about the majority of cases. And she's not talking about really what cancel culture is of relevance to.
Desmond, when Josh was going about answering this, you disagreed. What were your thoughts on that? Or why did
exactly
you
what
disagree?
he just said. Like, she's right in a sense, but she's not speaking for the vast majority when it comes to the definition of cancel culture. Like, I agree with the last part of the tweet when she says, when it comes to being canceled, odds are you're not canceled, you're just being challenged, held accountable, or unliked. I agree with that, but I just don't agree with her term. The term cancel culture comes from entitlement. Like that part, that sentence right there, just kind of, it throws everything. It kind of grades everything for me. I can't necessarily agree with that.
Is it because the fact that what we just said earlier was that there are certain things that are deplorable and there are things that need to be spoken out against, and then so by you saying that this comes from entitlement? No?
Nah, this comes from exactly what Marco and I were saying, where there's no clear definition of what cancel culture is. So for you to try and describe cancel culture or say it's derived from entitlement, I think it misrepresents what cancel culture is actually in its organic, or I guess how it's meant to be. It doesn't go hand in hand with entitlement. I think it goes hand in hand with the latter part of her tweet, but I think there's just, for me, as I'm reading it, there's confliction with what she states cancel culture is and then the latter part of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you guys are correct in that assessment. I'm wondering, when I'm thinking about cancel culture, what is the path forward here? I think we're all kind of in agreement that at the worst case, it's something that should be addressed somehow, and in the best case, it's causing. Actually, I think I have that reversed. In the best case, it's like a lukewarm thing that could be causing problems, whatever. And in the worst case, it's something that has to be addressed, or we're sacrificing something akin to the fabric of just having conversation with people in North America or Europe or wherever it's occurring. And I don't think we solve cancel culture without tackling this type of polarization that's captivated so many people. To be viewing people who think differently as an enemy, to be seeing them as people worthy of actually fighting and trying to destroy. Instead of just people with different ideas and perhaps you can convince them to join your side. Just the way we frame issues today is not conductive to actually getting rid of cancel culture. I think it's the opposite. Just the environment has ramped up just how much we're eager to use this tool of canceling someone.
I think a lot of that was actually almost the exact same question I was going to ask. Like, how do we promote healthy discourse moving forward among parties that disagree? And I think it starts on an individual basis, us being able to take in and reassess how exactly we go about doing that. So the two examples that I'll give is Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson, who I'm a huge fan of, I guess, no real secret about that, but I love watching his interviews, read his book, his biblical series, 13-part, everything. But the way he conducts himself in a debate is that he's more so concerned with finding out the truth, and he's also willing to listen to the opposing person. And it's not so much as he sets out to embarrass or dismantle a certain idea. It's that he's going to come on and you're going to discuss the idea and keep the individual out of it. And then my problem with Ben Shapiro, who I'm less of a fan of, is that his mindset when it comes to how he handles a debate is that I think the term he likes to use is shellacking. So he likes to go and embarrass the other person. And so when you go into a disagreement with the mindset of you want to embarrass another individual, you're cutting off communication. I can't think of a single instance to where you're having a conversation with somebody and you embarrass them, and then they're going to side with you or be even willing to cooperate with you in any capacity. Like that really puts everything at a real standstill. So if we all take the individualistic approach to say, hey, maybe there is an issue, maybe I have some views on this, maybe you have some views on this, I really don't like that, but let's hash this out, let's sit down, or let me actually consider this. So I think it comes from us taking or adopting a more open mindset and actually taking the time to address things as opposed to running away from them. What were your thoughts on that?
I agree with you 100%. I actually wanted to pass the mic to someone else because if I had to answer, it would literally be what you just said. So nothing new to contribute.
Josh, Des,
Yeah.
Jacob?
Go for it, guys. I would play devil's advocate since we're in agreement for a brief second, because in a way, for example, with something like J.K. Rowling, so we have this situation where someone who's in a tremendous position of power, and she's got 13 houses, 2 castles, whatever. She's sold the most books ever. And she writes something such as this statement. What did she write? She said that only women who menstruate are women, something like that.
That was the implication. What she said. She had said there's
Okay.
a word for people like this, women who menstruate, or people who menstruate. It was something along those lines.
Yeah. So she said something, and so. In this case, it's so difficult, right? Because you're in this place where you're like, okay, so what are you saying? Why are you saying it? And you know how many people follow you, and you know what media attention this is going to get. So in a way, either you're completely ambivalent and ignorant and then ambivalent, which, so you don't know what's going to happen, or you don't care what's going to happen, or you're doing it purposefully to get attention. And so all of those cases, I think, to me, are morally, I'm not interested in them, because I'm just kind of like, so in a way, she is responsible for being irresponsible. She's responsible for not thinking about it too much, or not. But then this is the point, that she has completely the right to believe whatever she believes, and she has completely the right to say whatever she believes, but she doesn't have the right to not receive pushback. And the thing about society is that, of course, people are just mad all the time about everything, and so it's like you can't expect it. But the weirdest part, so Ginsberg passed away sadly yesterday, or 2 days ago, was it? And so I follow a very left-leaning person from Vancouver. She has a podcast as well. And she said, celebrating heroes is dangerous. Despite Ginsberg being one of the 9 women in a Harvard law class of 300 or 500 students, whatever it was, in 1953, celebrating heroes is bad. And Ginsberg said something, passed a law or helped pass a law or helped promote a policy that harmed Aboriginal, indigenous groups in America in 2005. And she said that there's no such thing as heroes, and we shouldn't call people heroes. And to me, that was very interesting, because I was like, Ginsberg, of all the people you're going for, this staple of perseverance, equality, freedom of speech, and so it's interesting that this is why I don't know how far cancel culture will go, because it's going to come for everyone. If it's coming for Ginsberg, someone who, she's the proper feminist. She is, she's the Simone de Beauvoir of the legal field. And so it's interesting to me. Yeah, it's a shame. But so devil's advocate is that, okay, Rowling, she should be responsible. And then the question is, who is this going to come for, and when's the end of that? But I mean, yeah, if you guys have anything to say to that.
Right, to play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, how much accountability are you placing on a person for how people receive what they say?
Which accountability are you placing on a person? Oh, I see.
Outside
exactly.
of the
I mean, yeah, you're right.
Generally outrageous things, like how, to which standard are you going to hold someone accountable for how
You're right,
somebody else
yeah,
perceives
because
it?
I mean that is the problem. That I've often met this view that I just said, and yeah, the response to that totally is justifiable to say you're not responsible for. The only thing you're responsible for. This is a big debate. Is the intention. If your intention was all right, and if you were not ignorant and not ambivalent, and you considered the options and said what you thought, then in those cases, okay, your intention was right. You're good. And so it's really hard. That's the point. It's really hard to know.
It is, and like with the example you just gave with J.K. Rowling, is that a luxury that we afford to quote unquote normal people like us, and then we take away from people because they have a certain amount of money or a certain amount of reach? Are they not deserving of the same courtesy?
Maybe I would take it away from certain people. Maybe not Rowling, because she's not in politics. But maybe I would take it away from someone like Biden or something. I don't know if they should be allowed to say completely. I mean, they're already restricted just because of wanting to win an election or, being in politics. So they are restricted. They don't have complete free speech, and they don't want it because they wouldn't be in politics. So, but yeah.
Your question, Brian, was how do we do moving forward? Like, how do we?
Yeah. So my question was, how do we encourage normal, healthy discourse? And I think that was also Marco's question too. Is like, what's the plan moving forward?
I mean, like I said, I think. Well, first of all, I agree with everything you guys are saying, basically, but I think you guys are looking at it more from the cancel culture's perspective, where I'm looking at it more towards the people getting canceled perspective. I just think the thing that we should do moving forward, I don't think we should ever try to you can say we can provide, we can create conversations or everything for the people with the cancel culture, but they're gonna keep doing it because they're that's they getting that attention, you know what I mean? So I feel like we just have to react better to it. That's really my answer to that. Like, we have to react better to it, and really, I really feel that will really cancel culture if you really put it that way. But yeah, it's really about reaction. That's really the main thing. Because really, with my job and everything, I feel like even with Kanye, people have a problem with the things Kanye do. I'm just like, if you not want to give Kanye attention, don't give Kanye attention. That's how you defeat Kanye. You don't give him attention. That's how you defeat Kanye. And then they'll realize okay, I'm not getting that attention anymore, and it'll die down. But the same thing I feel goes with cancel culture. With J.K. Rowling, the thing with J.K. Rowling, if I'm trying to, I guess, justify what she's saying, I think what she's saying, if you guys are correct with her quote of saying only women go through menstrual cycles or something like that, I believe that women, when they go through menopause, they feel that they're not a woman anymore. So maybe including something to that, I don't know.
To clarify with that, so she was labeled as being transphobic because transgender women, they don't fit that category. So that was the problem for that specific tweet.
Okay, I have no idea with that. but yeah, the main thing is just reacting to it. I would say the main thing, don't give it a huge reaction, and that's really how you defeat cancel culture and cancel it altogether, in my opinion, really.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that's really the answer, because by giving we're actually the people who give things power by allocating our energy and thoughts towards them and then feeding into it. Like, if you address things once, kind of like what you said, how Kevin Hart handled it, and then you said that you wish he didn't apologize that many times. But if he was actually sorry for what he said and he had grown from that, just leave it at that. And by stepping down, or in other different people who have encountered that or been in that same position, they're setting a precedent. So they feel, people further down the line feel additional pressure. So it all starts with, I guess, holding ourselves accountable and standing up for what we believe, and not buckling just because there's outside pressure. Because in the case of what AOC said in that tweet, most times it's generally just a challenge.
You got to think of it as like a troll. Like, you gonna keep feeding into the troll and like we keep replying, or you just I'll leave it alone. Like, you know what I mean? So that's really how it is. Depending on allegations. If you like Bill Cosby or some shit, then you done. but yeah. Anything else you guys want to add? Marco? Jacob?
I really like your point. It's true. The reaction matters. And something you said before too about not excessively apologizing, but just explaining what happened, you know, whether it's a growing thing, something you said in jest. I think it's just sad though that people in the current environment I don't think they would accept that. You know, you can try and be logical about it. You can be like, this tweet from 10 years ago doesn't represent who I am now. You can say it was a joke, it was whatever. People will still be trying to come for your head. So it seems like the response that we're getting at now is just to, you know, as we're saying, ignore it or brush them off. And it's tragic that we can't even have a conversation about these things because people are just too polarized again. They're not willing to hear the rationale. They just want to get rid of you, and you don't want to get rid of. So the only option here is to just, you know, push it to the back. And there might be valid concerns in there that are worth unpacking, but we can't even do that, it seems.
I would maybe add that, and also we talked about it earlier, that we need to also promote, apart from this, the idea of slow thinking versus fast thinking. Everything in life now is fast, you know, media, attention, we're all over the place. While we're watching movies, we're scrolling Twitter, we're reacting to this, and you know, we're just all over the place with information, and we're not slow anymore. We don't really check, is that study actually correct? Do I even know what a good study is? You know, what is good research? What isn't good research? What are good credentials? What aren't? What opinions matter for who? If you're a political commentator, obviously commenting on politics makes you a more relevant source. If you're not, and you're commenting on politics, then maybe I shouldn't listen to you as much as I should. Or with religion, you know, if Peterson says something about religion, well, he's a psychologist, etc. You know, just being more kind of aware of these kind of things, and then acknowledging them and saying like, okay, well then I should listen to this, and then also knowing that obviously you don't have to be correct. So just kind of like slow thinking. The problem with slow thinking is that it's impossible. You know, we're not programmed to be rational people. We're programmed to be almost function as lawyers. You know, we find positions and then we find reasons to defend them. And we don't know why we have those positions before. I think we just need to understand the human condition better, understand the prevalence of us versus them, groupthink, and then also see that often the political divide is a facade, and we're fallible human people that need to just connect on a spiritual level. So, yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Des? Brian?
No, I've checked everything off my list.
Des?
Man, I just think that's it's such a loaded topic in itself, because when I think of cancel culture, and before I even go on to that, Jacob, it's funny you brought up someone trying to cancel RBG, because one of the guys I was in pre-law with at my university, he posted a RIP pic for RBG, but he posted the article of CNN when she was speaking on Kaepernick's protest, and she thought that it was hold on, I pulled it up. She identified it as really dumb, but she wouldn't lock a person up for doing it. She said she thinks it's dumb and disrespectful. So I thought it was funny how you weren't the only one to see something of a slight like that, the RPG. But the biggest thing I have with like cancel culture itself, and I guess, are we trying to say how we either eradicate cancel culture or how we bring it to a forefront where there's logical thinking involved? Like, which one?
Last
what is
question
the main
was
objective with that second? Yeah.
the last question was how do we what's the best way to move forward and to have normal discourse between opposing sides?
That's a hard. Yeah, I think that's why it's so loaded, because case in point today, someone I followed on Facebook, past tense, of course, she posted that her exact question was, what do my Christian followers use for streaming services aside from Netflix and Disney? So the question really it really baffled me, because that is the weirdest question. Like, I've never known there to be a religious-based streaming service of any kind. And when I went into the comments, she was like, somebody's like vividly asked her, like, yeah, why are you no longer with Netflix and Disney? And she says, well, Disney pushes this agenda of a princess or a woman always needing a man, and Netflix has pushed forward a lot of series that blur the lines of sexuality, and it's more favoring of transsexuality and things of that nature. And I was just thinking to myself, I was like, these people are like high school, college graduates with thinking of this nature. So it's kind of hard for us to have a genuine conversation when some people's backbone is still religion. And we've kind of touched bases on this podcast. I'm pretty sure, the Perry platform as well, they touch bases on it, but arguing with the person on the basis of religious is more or less a dead argument, because we might have somebody, I can't remember his name, but like the guy from 2 episodes ago, where he was a pastor, but he
Tim.
also dived into psychology. Tim, exactly. Tim he's a pastor, but more or less isn't afraid to question a religion in itself. But then you have a majority, and I'm pretty sure not all Republicans are, diehard Christians per se, but the majority thinks that way. And when I say majority, I always think of like power. Like when there's a power paradigm, and you have people with the most money that have the most influence, they think that we're not influenced in the sense of exactly with cancel culture, where people are able to sway the opinions of people. But when we think of like the actual power paradigm in itself, I think it's hard to push forward sensible thinking or sensible conversation when there's so many loaded factors in it, because a lot of with sensible thinking, I think, is emotional intelligence as well. And I think we touched on that on our Go conversation as well. If people don't have the ability to listen first and then think second, then there's always going to be that trigger. Somebody's going to say something to where it shuts the entire conversation down and everything blows up, like the J.K. Rowling example. Whether it be wrong or not, that's not my decision to play. I could care less about it, because for me, it's no surprise. Like we're history. We're a nation that's riddled with dark history, and whether we choose to accept it or not, that hasn't really been, there's no true guideline. Like, for example, the way I look at it like this is, we're trying to hold people within this nation accountable when this nation itself hasn't been accountable for its own actions. And when I think of it like that, when I think on the macro level that we're not even, and this is very, very prevalent with international law, to where the U.S. is able to, I don't know, a little bit off topic, but the U.S. is able to carry out drone strikes, but there's never retaliation. The U.S. is able to blur the lines when it comes to international law, but the second something happens to, a U.S., something happens on U.S. soil or whatever, then there's a very, very big conflict that will, of course, ensue. So if I'm looking at it from that perspective, and I say, even on the macro level, the U.S. is untouchable, does that not pass down to your every day-to-day citizens as well, to where they have that aura of invincibility as well, to where they can say what they say, and they might, be on the front page for 2 or 3 weeks, but then it typically goes to the backstory at the end of the day. I feel like it's a very, very hard. It's very hard to push when people at the head of the nation or at the helm of the nation, they're not even truly held accountable for their actions as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything else you want to add, Brian? No?
Nope.
All right. You have a album of the week, Des?
No, I don't have an album of the week. Were you gonna say something?
No. Okay.
Oh no, I don't have an album of the week. Really, what I've been listening to this week is I posted to my Instagram story about 2 or 3 days ago, and it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And man, that audio book has been like it's filled with a lot of gems. So that's gonna be my.
It's also a Christian writer, I believe, Stephen.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't necessarily heard anything that is based off of religion, but I think the biggest lesson I've learned from it, or why I really have a appreciation for it, is because he talks about like how you handle your children, like when you putting things into perspective. And I think the biggest thing he mentioned was you can't necessarily force a child to share something that they haven't possessed. And I think that's very big as we grow older, is when you look at the people that are always sharing themselves, per se, doing for others, they often have never taken the time to truly possess themselves. So there's that very, very low battery that they never get to recharge, but they're constantly, giving to others. So I think he gives a very, very, he gives a very, very interesting theory on why people need to be more possessive of themselves first and their things before they get to others.
Gotcha. All right. If you guys like the discussion, don't forget to hit the like button. We're going to see you guys next week. Oh, wait. No, we're not, because we're going on vacation, I guess, right? The last episode.
We're going to take a short hiatus.
Yep. We'll see you guys after the hiatus. And, of course, thank you to Marco and Jacob for coming on the podcast. We appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Peace.
Oh, hey, I didn't even see you there. But while you're here, be sure to check out other great content from the Breakdown crew, including previous episodes of the podcast, Joshua vs. Movies, Joshua vs. Music, and of course, haven't forgotten about my plant lovers, Feel the Love. Just check out this begonia.